As in live? We're already switched over and everything? Okay. Nice. Oh, it's good to have everyone with us this morning. I got some that are in here not feeling too well, some that are gone because they're not feeling well, and so we hope that they will have a speedy recovery to come back with us. We are in Matthew 26, and we are fixing to move into the Garden of Gethsemane after the establishment of the Lord's Supper and the observance of the Passover that Jesus is involved in with his apostles. And we have been emphasizing just how it is in this chapter that Jesus is able to deal with the greatest stress that anybody has ever had to deal with. And that it has all been centered around and focused around, as Luke describes it in Luke chapter 22, 14 through 15, where Jesus says to his apostles, with desire, I have desire to eat this Passover with you, and that before I suffer. That this Passover had meaning to Jesus. And thus, and really when we're considering all of life and the problems that we have to go through, the stresses we have to go through, the turmoil, and not just even all the negative things, but even with the positive things that we have going on in our lives, all of those things should create within us this very mentality. A desire to come together and to worship. Whether I'm going through hard times, hey, I should have a desire to come before God. I'm suffering. I need to come before God and be reminded of His mercies, His loving kindness, His graciousness, His majesty, His power. But even if you take away the suffering and that, okay, everything's fine for the moment, then okay, coming before God with thanksgiving, with thankfulness for what it is that God is actually doing and helping in all these different areas. And that even with this desire that he has to eat with them, what he says here is still true of what we will do today in partaking of the Lord's Supper. That with desire, Jesus says, I have desire to eat this with you. That we will sup together, not only with one another, but that we will in fact be in communion with God today. So all of that is intertwined in this discussion with the things that are happening. And then verse 31. Then said Jesus unto them, all ye shall be offended because of me this night, for it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered abroad. This is a quotation of Zechariah 13 and verse 7. But then notice, so with all of this, none of this is happening by accident. All of this is happening in accordance with what God has already said that's going to happen. Thus, you have what is being presented in verse 32. Notice the confidence that is then able to be had. But after I am risen again, I will go before you into Galilee. That this is not the end. It may seem that way, and it may appear that way, and that none of this really makes sense as to how this is going to bring about the kingdom, establish His glory, and all those different things. But it will. The cross did not stop Him from leading where they were needing to go. He knew where He was going, and Jesus knew full well what would happen. But not only what will happen to Him, but what's going to happen to the flock. So as we're thinking about this from the standpoint of the apostles, what should this have done to the mentality of the apostles?
Reassured them.
All right, reassured them that, hey, what's about to happen, do not be overcome with grief or shame. That as this is being prophesied, it's one of those situations that it's really putting them in a difficult spot. if you really stop and think about it, with the apostles. Of what is it that we're supposed to do in this situation? Do we just, are we supposed to stick with him through all of this? Or is it not a situation, is it not really a case of what Jesus is going to have to go through? He's going to have to go through it alone.
I have a question. It says, I am risen again. What does again mean?
So, I know what you're trying to ask, but just can you elaborate just a little bit more while I look this up? From the standpoint of,
If you're saying again, when did he arise beforehand?
oh, okay, all right, I'm with you.
He went over to America.
Right, yeah, according to the Book of Mormon there. Oops. And this is the one area where presenter mode does not help. Okay. So again, when we are thinking about different words and how it is that we are using them, it carries, when our understanding or usage of the word again, it can carry with it that meaning of, okay, this has happened once, therefore it's happening again in the standpoint of, okay, we're repeating something. But that word again, when used in Old English and also in connection with the Greek, it doesn't necessarily carry that idea that this is a repetition of something that's already happened, but that it is just simply saying that I'm going to raise again, or I'm going to raise up, or I'm going to be lifted up. So with it in this usage, it doesn't carry with it the idea of a repetition. It's just simply a thing of, I'm going to be raised again. I'm going to be lifted up.
In John with Nicodemus and being born again,
Okay.
Is that the same context, or is that being born?
That would be a good thing to look up. Let's do that right quick. Just to see if it's that same word, and then that can help us to, once again, deal with that idea of allowing context. I don't know why I canceled that out. I needed it over here in the first place. Oh, I see what it's doing. All right, let's cascade. And let's see what we get here. Okay, so it's not in that context of John 3,
Okay.
this word. So that makes me wonder what that word is. So John 3.
Verse 3.
Okay, so yeah, that's a different word. By analogy from the first, by implication, anew from above, again from the beginning, first, the top. So actually, that is a bad translation on the part of the King James writers. That it shouldn't be again, it actually should be from above. Which gives further clarification as to what's actually what is transpiring and what Jesus is actually teaching to Nicodemus. So yeah.
Again, this is what you get. Again, this is what you get when you're not just reading through the Bible. This is why you have to study your Bible to see different things.
Yep, and it's those. So even with thinking about that question that Jamie asked, you just wanted possibly just brush over it. Okay, I know what the word again means, but then actually going into it and looking at it, it's oh, this actually doesn't hold that that very same idea. So yeah, this isn't a situation of repetition of something that's gone on before. It's just after I'm risen again. I've died, I'm going to be raised again to be able to come back to life. All right, so good question. Good quick little word study we got to go through there.
Not a trivia.
No, definitely not. So let's see. Yeah, so then moving on. Okay. So you have this prophecy being made, and then, so we have true confidence here, and then we see false confidence with Peter. Peter answered and said unto him, though all men shall be offended because of thee, yet will I never be offended. Now here is a problem that not just what Peter is having. This is a problem of pretty much all mankind. And we've already seen it with the beginning of Matthew chapter 26, and how it was that Jesus said 2 days is the Passover, and I'm set to be betrayed and killed. But then we have the mindset of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the chief priests, and they're saying, no, we're not going to kill him on the feast day. So here we have the will of God and what His direction is and what His Word actually says. And now what's Peter doing? God. No, God. I know better. And that's what people are doing today. With what clear Scripture says, and Scripture that has clear application to them, but because they do not like what it says, what do they try to do? No, that's not going to happen to me. God said it's going to happen to you, it's going to happen to you. This is what the prophet has said, it's going to follow through. You're not going to change that. You're not going to be able to overcome that. And thus again, Peter should be recognizing what it is he's actually saying here. He's speaking contrary to what God has already said.
Well, he should have remembered what had happened when Jesus rebuked him and said, get thee behind me.
All right, that's Matthew 16.
Because it had already happened.
That's right. Okay, that's good. So here we are in Matthew 26, and all the way back in Matthew 16, we've already had this conversation. I'm going to die. And Peter stood up and said, Lord, be it far from thee. And then the response Jesus gave was, get behind me, Satan. You're not thinking about things that God has said. You're not considering the will of God, but in fact, you're working from a fleshly way of thinking, from a carnal way of thinking. And so here's Peter, and he's still struggling with it. Why? And so when you think about this, this is a shameful position to be put in, is it not? You're following Jesus all this time, and now here he is about to be betrayed, and you're going to take off running. How does that make you look? Way to go, coward. Chicken, just whatever else. But it's just a step back and to recognize and say, okay, hey, this is already going to play out. I know how it's going to play out. There's nothing I can do about it. And in fact, even when they do try to do something, Jesus sends them off. He says to the mob, or to the officers that come to arrest him, in John's account, he says by request, let these go their way. Do them no harm. So it never was a situation that Jesus was going to let them stay. That you are going to flee. Jesus said unto him, verily I say unto thee, that this night, before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. Now here again, another prophetic statement. And this, in real time, the one that you are claiming to follow as the Messiah, as the Son of God, and he takes it a step further. Peter, not only are you going to be offended and flee, you are actually going to deny me. And again, Peter's going to end up saying, no, it's not going to happen. Who are you to go against what God says? Well, when what God says goes contrary to what I think, we see how ready men are to stand up and to push their position. Now, here's what we're able to learn with what we're seeing with Peter. If I get to the place that I think that I can handle life on my own, and not just handle life on my own, but I can handle life contrary to what God has already said, or that I continue to do things that are not good for me because I think that I cannot survive without them, then I'm right here in Peter's situation. That I'm recognizing, I see what God's Word says, but oh no, that's not going to be me. Or I see what God's Word says, but no, I'm not going to do that. To be here and I do not recognize my need for God's help. When Jesus made that statement, Peter should have been like requesting, finding some way to ask for help. No, I don't want to do this. What can I do so that this doesn't happen? But he doesn't take it from that course. Exactly. And to have this way of thinking, I'm in trouble. And there are a lot of people that are doing the very thing, like doing today, the very thing that Peter's doing here. They talk a big game, but that's all it is. It's just talk, talk, talk. Oh, if this happened, I would do this. Yeah, right. Sure. You're right here. We do not need to boast about what it is that's ahead of us, especially if it's something that we've not gone through before. And to say that, okay, I know how I'm going to handle this. And you have individuals, so like with Peter, we've already seen him buckle at least 2 different times when it came to questioning from the Pharisees. Does your master pay taxes to the temple?
Sure he does.
Exactly. Of course.
You want to see his tax records?
Right. And Jesus has to correct him on that. And I'm thinking about the paying tribute to Caesar, and actually Peter wasn't involved in that, so scratch that one. To where it's just like, okay, Peter, we've already seen you in action. And here you are doing this talk. No, I know how you're going to be. Because you've already shown yourself. And then we have brethren that want to do the same thing. Oh, I wouldn't be offended. Oh no, I'll stand. You say that when you've not done one thing to show that you actually would. To have brethren that would say, oh no, I'll go to jail for the gospel. But then you can't take the ugly things people say about us. You can't take the derogatory remarks. You can't take the sideways glances that people give us. You can't handle those things, and then you want me to believe that you'll be able to handle this big thing. No, you're showing yourself. But with the showing, as we studied last week in our sermon, all of this should be a promotion towards growth. To where we will actually be able to handle these things. So Peter failed to recognize these elements that we're discussing. And thus Peter ended up failing in that situation. But it's not only a situation of Peter and his involvement. Notice verse 35. Jesus says, you'll deny me. And Peter said unto him, though I should die with thee, yet will I not deny thee. Likewise also said all the disciples. So now, here are the others joining in. And why would they be doing that? Okay. We've already got glimpses of their motives in this. What is the behavior of the apostles as they're following Jesus? Who's going to be the greatest? Now, here you got Peter doing all this big talk. What's everybody else got to do?
No, I want.
Exactly. Oh no, I can't be outdone by Peter. Peter, oh no, I'm with you. They can put me up on the cross next to you. You see what's happening here? Trying to outgun each other. When they all, and that's fleshly, that's carnal. When they all should be looking at the situation and saying, wow, we're getting a really good glimpse of ourselves. With what Jesus, the Son of God, is saying. You're going to run, you're going to deny. And it's just like, man, I'm not as strong as I thought I was.
Do you think Peter was sincere with his statement saying that, or was he just talking a tough game?
I think there is some sincerity there, and we'll notice some things as we move forward in this that will show some of that. But in knowing, so like we're saying, knowing what we know about the apostles, having that sincerity mixed in with that carnality is what causes the problem. To where, so here's the carnal side of it, in trying to go against what the master is actually saying. No, this won't happen to me. Oh no, I know better than that. Oh, buddy, that's not where you need to head. But so like when we get into the garden and Peter draws the sword, I think there's some connection in that. The fact that Peter would draw the sword and escalate it shows that there is some connection to this. Yeah.
I would just tack on to this that how far back was it when they were saying, no, get those children away, and lacking the compassion for people. So their growth in a spiritual sense, is kind of slow.
Yeah.
So it still isn't, it's 10 years after this when Peter's like, oh, the Gentiles. Can be heard too? So, not there.
Yeah.
So they're growing.
And that even with that, yeah, I agree 100% that what we're seeing here is the growing process. And look at what's included in that growing process. Jesus points out very clearly, Peter, here's where you are. That, yeah, you're needing to grow, and look at what you're going to do. You're going to deny me thrice. You're going to run away. So in fact, if we're going to have the proper growth process that is needing to take place to get Peter to where he's going to be with the Gentiles, there's got to be this. A calling it out. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to fail. You're going to mess up here. But as we know with Peter, that's not the end of Peter. He did not let that failure define him or become him. And thus that goes back to the point that Maddie made about the sincerity. There's where the sincerity comes in. And that he kept going. All right, so good questions, good thoughts. Anything else?
Just thinking you have to get knocked down a couple of times in order to be humbled. So later on it's like, oh yeah, the Gentiles get to hear it. It's like, instead of first thing going, no, whatever. It's like, okay, I've gone through this a few different times. The Gentiles get to hear it. I'll do God's will. You know, that there's motive behind there now.
And all of that is stemming just from a misunderstanding. Peter is not piecing these things together. And thus, when you misunderstand something, what do you end up doing? You end up reacting poorly. So even with Cornelius and the Gentiles, Peter has to see a vision 3 times. And still, what is Peter trying to do with God? The same thing he's doing here. Trying to argue. And even then, it's not even really a situation of arguing, like we're saying, as it is just a misunderstanding. I'm seeing this and I'm hearing this, but I don't understand. But then when Peter gets there to Cornelius' house and he sees what ends up happening, Acts chapter 11 tells us, then he starts piecing it together. Then he starts recognizing what the vision was about. And so it really is a situation of, okay, here we see misunderstanding. You say something and you do certain things that you shouldn't do because of that misunderstanding, but it's not the end of the world. You correct it. You admit, you recognize your misunderstanding. And you let it go and you head the other direction. And thus you have the contrast between Peter and Judas. That we'll see in just a moment inside of this chapter. All right, so yeah, anything else? All right, good, very good. All right, verse 35. Peter said unto him, though I should die with thee, yet will I not deny thee. Likewise also said all the disciples. All right, so as we said, the others join in, and they do so with no idea with what is actually coming. So we need to be careful what we end up boasting about. What it is that we will do if such and such were to happen. And then, when we're thinking about what is being discussed here, when we then align other accounts of this situation with what's transpired, we are then able to realize just how important Luke's recording of this conversation between Jesus and Peter actually is. In Luke 22:31, here's what Luke gives us. The Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. And he said unto him, Lord, I am ready to go with thee, both into prison and to death. And he said, I tell thee, Peter, the cock shall not crow this day before that thou shalt thrice deny that thou knowest me. Now just look at it from that standpoint. Jesus knows what's about to happen. Peter, you are about to turn your back on me. But does that change the way Jesus feels about Peter? What does Jesus realize? Satan hath desired to have you. Who gets the blame on this? The devil does. Now Peter's involved. Peter's not possessed. He's not out of his bounds of control. But this is a recognition of the things that happen. Some things happen purely by happenstance. In Ecclesiastes, the Bible says very clearly, time and chance happens to every man. But you know what? There are some things that are playing out in accordance with what the devil wants.
Well, isn't it because Peter has the keys, or is going to have the keys to the kingdom?
Okay, just think about who Peter's going to be.
And can you clarify when thou art converted?
All right, so we would think about Peter being in the position that he's in. You would think that this conversion situation has already taken place. And that's what Jesus said in Matthew 18, except you be converted and become as little children. you shall not enter to the kingdom of heaven. It's the same situation that James writes about. And that James ends up writing to Christians, and he makes mention of the fact in James chapter 5, you got the exact verse on? Okay. Yeah. So James 5, we'll start in verse 18. And he prayed again, and the heaven gave rain, and the earth brought forth her fruit. Brethren, if any of you do err from the truth. So that gives us very clearly the idea that we can, in fact, depart from the truth. And not only does James write about that, but Paul writes about that very frequently. There are some that will forsake the truth. If any of you do err from the truth, and one convert him. So here's that process needing to happen again. You've gone away from the truth. You've gone out into the world. And you're needing to be brought back. And verse 20 says, let him know that he which converteth the sinner from the error of his way. Now, in this time frame, you have those that are struggling with Judaism, those that are struggling with idolatry, and that there would be those temptations to go back under the system of the Mosaic law, where there is no sacrifice that can redeem man. And you have those that have come out of the world, out of idolatry, and because of everything that's going on, they would want to go back to that. And that in their departing, they are a sinner, and that they are in error. And that now we're needing to convert them back. Now that doesn't mean we have to go back through all the processes. You got to be baptized and all that kind of thing. But it's showing the severity of what is happening. So even with what's going to happen with Peter, in Luke's account, in Luke chapter 24, I think in Mark's account also it says it, that when Jesus ended up appearing to his apostles again, he actually had to upbraid them because of their unbelief. Their unbelief. Does that mean they'd become atheists? No, they hadn't become atheists. But they were so distraught that they were ready to give up on the entire system. To the degree, no, it's fine, to the degree that Peter ends up saying what? What was he wanting to do? I go fishing. He wanted to go back to his old occupation because of how difficult all of this was. So what were you going to say there?
So in this sense, when he had to upbraid them because of their unbelief, is this the same belief that we get when we are obedient? Is it the same usage of that word? You know, when we have, because they believed, therefore, I'm just trying to make kind of a vague connection how when people say, oh, they believed, so they're therefore saved and converted.
Right.
But we know it to be they believed, therefore they obeyed, therefore they were doing God's
right.
word. Is that what this is a connection
Okay.
to?
That would be a good connection because it'd be the same type of situation as in Numbers 21, where Moses is told to speak to the rock, but instead he smote the rock, and it says very clearly that he did not believe God. It wasn't a thing that he stopped believing in Jehovah, or that he was turning his back on God and that he wasn't going to follow God anymore. It is a clear showing that if we are going to be believers, or that we're going to believe, then we're going to do what is commanded of us. And so in that connection with what Jesus is dealing with and upbraiding their unbelief, I would agree that, it's not a situation that they stopped believing that he was the Son of God or that he was the Messiah. But it's just the fact of, okay, I've given you all this information. I'm going to die. Here are the people that are going to do it. Here's the time frame that it's going to happen. And even in mentioning the manner, the type of way that he's going to die, he mentions the crucifixion. And then in this chapter, in Matthew 26, he says, I'm going to raise again, and I'm going to go before you into Galilee. And here they are, still cowering. Just... Why? So there again, if they had the right kind of belief and the right kind of trust in what God says and what Jesus was saying, then what would their attitude, their behavior be like? Okay, this is nothing. We'll go ahead into Galilee and we'll wait, just like you said. But that's not what they're doing. And they have to be upbraided for it. And that it's a calling out. Look, we're not just sweeping this under the rug, what you're doing here. We're addressing this. You shouldn't have done this. There should have been a great deal of confidence in leading up to these days. But that's not there. And thus, so with the prayer and the fact that Jesus says, I've prayed for thee that thy faith fail not. Okay, we've already said with Peter, you're going to make some mistakes leading up to this. You are going to be offended. You are going to run. You are going to deny me 3 times. But that does not mean that your faith has failed. You can make those mistakes, and I'm praying for you that you'll come through it. That though your faith grew weak here, I am praying that your faith will strengthen once you get past it. So it's the same type of situation as Peter asking to go out on the water. And he starts to sink. And what was the response that Jesus gave to him? Oh, thou of little faith. Okay. As we said, faith is what got him out of the boat. Faith is what got him walking on the water. And it's when we start walking by sight and not by faith that our faith grows weak, and that's when we start to sink. So here we have with Peter, it's happening again. And guess what? It's going to happen again. And it's going to happen again. But here we have the mindset of God towards a person who will not let faith fail. I've prayed for thee. I have made request on your behalf that you'll come through it. Now let's just take this and apply it to ourselves. How is it that God, how does He see us when our faith grows weak, and even when we fail Him? If we have this same level of sincerity that Peter has, here's how God sees us when we make mistakes. God knows that if we are wanting to be something great for the kingdom, and that if we are really trying to seek first the kingdom like Jesus says, Satan desires us. Satan is going to come after us. And that in knowing that, and that Jesus would pray for Peter, and knowing that Christ sits at the right hand of God today as our advocate, as our mediator, and that He is doing that for us when our faith grows weak, then what about when I make mistakes and I have to be corrected? How should I behave? I should not be walking around as though there's some great burden on me, or that I've got to walk around with some scarlet letter taped to my chest. You learn from it and you go on. So all of this is emphasizing to us, as it should have been emphasizing to Peter, every day I need the help that only God can give. That I need the strength that only God can supply. And sometimes that means having the strength to get back up when you fail. And as we've been emphasizing throughout our study, as Jesus has been teaching, that we cannot handle this life alone. And there are reminders of this point all around us. Not just when we're here, not just when we're reading stuff like this, but as we've discussed earlier chapters, the marriage relationship is a constant reminder that I cannot make it alone. That I need help, and God said, okay, I'm going to help you. I'm going to give you a wife. This class, our worship assembly, the fact that we are all here together is a reminder that none of us are strong enough to survive on our own. And that in part of that survival is going to be elements like this. We're going to have times where this kind of mentality is going to creep in with ourselves. Oh, I'm big enough to stand on my own. Just by you saying that is showing a problem. And that is Jesus pointing this out to Peter and to the other apostles, so we have brethren to help to point these things out to us. And so even with that, so here's verse 32, here's everything that Peter is going to do, and yet still Jesus says, okay, Peter, when thou art converted, don't start walking around like a little mouse. Don't start being sheepish. Strengthen thy brethren. Well, who's going to want to listen to me? I denied Jesus 3 times. That's carnality. That's fleshliness coming in. No, Peter, you are in a prime place to help people because you went through this, you failed, but you're able to overcome. But a lot of the times we get into our own mind, into our own head, And we start thinking about things that we've done, and it's just like, well, I'm not good for anything. No, no, no. That is what Christianity is all about. Redemption. So for Peter to go through this and to come out the other end brighter than he went in, Peter, you're a prime example of what this is all about. Peter, you are a prime example of this conversion that's needing to take place. Strengthen your brethren. Use your tribulation, use your turmoil for good. So then in going back to Matthew 26, 36 through 38, which is a retelling of what Luke said. Or excuse me, we're moving on. We've gone on into Gethsemane. So anything else before we move on into Gethsemane? Okay. Then cometh Jesus with them unto a place called Gethsemane, and saith unto the disciples, Sit ye here while I go and pray yonder. He took with him Peter, 2 sons of Zebedee, and began to be sorrowful and very heavy. Then saith he unto them, My soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry ye here, and watch with me. Again, in going through and studying, we need to do more than just reading. Put yourself here. Not in the place of Jesus, but just put yourself as somebody who just happened to be in the garden at the same time. And you're witnessing these things and you are hearing this exchange. And here's the Son of God saying, I'm exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. And just how lonely this would be. The despair that would be coming from this. And here you have these ones that you're wanting to be there as a support, but ultimately knowing they're not going to make it. We started our Matthew study, Matthew chapter 1, by emphasizing the mission that Jesus came to fulfill. That He would save Israel, or His people, from their sin. And that's a mission He has to fulfill on His own. He'd have to do that alone. Or at least to a degree. And that even in this situation we know that even though that would be the feeling of it, again, there are those reminders. You're not doing this alone. That from the other accounts, we're told that an angel came and ministered to him. What is that a reminder of? But that God is with you. You're not alone. While those that you would have closest to you physically may let you down, God in heaven is not going to let you down. He went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "Oh, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." And 3 times this statement will be made. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. And there's the key to all of it. What is it that is carrying Jesus through even to the point of death? And that I will do the will of the Father. Now we have this statement And it's a very simple statement. Or at least we think that it is. When we're thinking about everything that is included in the will of the Father, yes, it is to be persecuted. Yes, it is to be whipped. Yes, it is to be mocked. Yes, it is to carry the cross. Yes, it is to be put on the cross. But there's more to it than that. The will of the Father is that all men would be saved. And that in recognizing, okay, if I need to die so that others can live, and that's what God wants, then I will do that. If it is to be persecuted for righteousness' sake, and that is in accordance with the will of the Father, then I'll do it. In verse 40, he cometh unto the disciples and findeth them asleep, and saith unto Peter, what? Could ye not watch with me 1 hour? Oh, but you'll die for me, Peter, right? Can't even stay awake. Cannot even watch. Oh, but you won't be offended. But as we said, Peter will grow beyond this. This is just another one of those learning points in that development process. Watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. Here's the key. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Jesus is establishing what the struggle is going to be throughout our lives. All of that discussion in Romans chapter 7 that Paul has about what I should do, I don't do, and what I shouldn't do, that's the thing that I do. Jesus encapsulates that by saying this. The spirit indeed is willing, but here's what's constantly going to get in the way. Flesh, carnality. As we said, 3 times thy will be done. He went away again the second time and prayed, saying, O my Father, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done. Came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. And he left them and went away again and prayed the 3rd time, saying the same words. This is the very reason that Jesus came into the world. His hour is at hand. And if this is the only way that God's will can be done, then Jesus is ready. So when we are considering, as we discussed with Peter, and the problem that he had in being ready to do what he was needing to do, just as we said, this is what's at the heart of it. In knowing God's will, then everything Jesus was saying, Peter should have said, okay. Okay, I'm with you. Your will be done. But why was he wanting to argue? Because he still hasn't fully reached that level of setting aside his will. Oh, here's what my will wants. No, no, no. That's where we get into trouble. And that Jesus could face this and already have an answer, already have his mind made up on what he was going to do. Thy will be done. So what is it that's going to help us in making decisions in spur of the moment? Something happens at work, something happens at home, And now I need to figure out what I'm needing to do. If I know what the will of God is, my answer's already made for me. It then becomes a situation, a game of, am I going to sacrifice my will to make sure that His will is being done? So just as we said, another point of getting through struggles, obeying what the will of God is. And if I know that, then no matter what arises, I can have some level of preparation. Now, we will stop there. Well, 45, 46, that way we can just pick up with Judas coming. Then cometh he to his disciples, saith unto them, Sleep on now, take your rest, behold, the hour is at hand, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. Behold, he is at hand that doth betray me. From this point, Jesus will not rest. But you notice that even though while he is encouraging his apostles, hey, stay with me, watch, pray, I'm sorrowful even unto death. And even when he comes, the different times to find them, and he finds them sleeping, notice there's no indignation. There's no anger here. Jesus is not going to sleep, and because he's not going to sleep, he doesn't get angry because these individuals are sleeping. He just simply says, sleep on, take your rest. And I would present that this is because Jesus knows what's coming for the apostles in the future. That as they take the gospel out to the entire world, and that then they will be treated this same way.
That's our last moment of peace.
Then the apostles are really going to understand what's going on here. While Peter's in prison, and they've just beheaded James. Just making sure I got it right, because I got it wrong last time.
Well, it was with the sword, so it wasn't beheaded, so you still got it wrong.
What do you think they do with swords?
They stab.
Cut ears off.
Chop them in half?
Just as Peter is sitting in prison, and one of the others has already been killed, you don't think it started dawning on him that he began to understand, wow, this is just a small version of what Jesus suffered in Gethsemane. And then to think back that he was asleep while Jesus was suffering. But even still, we have being shown to us, how do we react to others when we find ourselves going through suffering? Well, I'm suffering, you need to be suffering too. Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus does not try to make others feel guilty because, oh, I'm fixing to have to go through this, I'm fixing to have a restless night, I'm fixing to be betrayed and killed for the sins of the world, and you couldn't stay awake? He says, no, sleep on. And then even in Acts chapter 12, when we find Peter in prison, and he's sitting between two guards, what's he doing? He's sleeping.
Man, he didn't read the Proverbs.
No, it's Peter learning and growing and recognizing that just as Jesus faced death and he could face it with confidence, okay, I'm in prison, there's nothing to worry about. I'm going to go to sleep. So there's Peter, still like going through that growth process. to where even with all of this and all the shortcomings, yeah, Jesus doesn't kick him to the side and say, I'm starting over. No, Jesus, with the statement, he recognized, all right, the intention's there. And this is just what we're working with. All right, so any thoughts, questions, comments there as we bring it to a close before Judas shows up with a multitude of soldiers and swords? All right, not seeing any hands, so we will.